Welcome to the Scrollfire Podcast. This is your host, Eliazar Seraphim. Tonight, we're going to do another deep dive NTM podcast hosted by Sebastian and Meagan Scott. In this episode, we will focus on your scroll, the second structural stone in the Scrollfire Seated series. Your scroll explores the idea that every life carries a design that originates from the mind of God. The scroll represents the pattern, purpose, and assignment written before history began. It is not something the believer invents through ambition or effort. It is something remembered from the posture of the seat. When the believer learns to sit in the finished work of Christ, the identity becomes clearer and the scroll begins to come into view. Calling, purpose, and responsibility emerge not from performance or seeking, but from alignment with what's already written within that came from the mind of God. The scroll therefore represents divine design rather than self-construction. The seat makes the scroll visible. The scroll is not created. The scroll is remembered. Now we'd like to hear from Sebastian and Meagan Scott.
I want you to just imagine something for a second. Try to picture what it would actually feel like to completely, and I mean completely, drop the exhausting pressure of trying to find yourself.
Oh, that's a heavy thought right there.
Right. You know, that heavy, constant, low-grade anxiety of feeling like you have to build your identity from scratch. That creeping suspicion that you need to somehow become someone impressive, or at least someone who appears to have it all figured out. Just imagine setting all of that heavy baggage down on the floor and just walking away from it.
It's a profound relief just entertaining the thought, isn't it? I mean, we operate in a society that constantly broadcasts this message that our lives are these blank canvases.
Yeah.
Exactly. And the implication is that if we aren't constantly painting, hustling, optimizing, and, creating a masterpiece of an identity, we are somehow falling behind. But the text we are looking at today poses a fascinating alternative.
It really does.
What if life isn't a blank canvas at all? What if you aren't supposed to be frantically creating an identity out of thin air, but rather simply uncovering one that already exists?
And that is the exact premise we're exploring in today's deep dive. We're looking at a 2025 book by Eliazar Seraphim called Your Scroll, A Beginner's Guide to Your Eternal Identity.
Yes.
And right off the bat, I want to set the tone for you listening today. This deep dive is not about adding another 10 steps to your self-improvement to-do list. The author isn't pushing a framework of religious pressure, rigid rules, or striving to meet some impossible standard. It reads much more like a gentle, peaceful exploration of identity.
That is a crucial distinction to make early on. Seraphim frames this entire concept not as a burden of performance, but as an invitation.
An invitation to just stop.
Exactly. It's an invitation to stop performing for the approval of others and to start resting in what the book suggests is already undeniably true about you.
So our mission today is to unpack the author's core concept of a scroll. We are going to explore what Seraphim means by being seated in rest, rather than running on that hamster wheel of performance.
Right.
And later on, we're going to delve into the incredibly compelling concept of discovering what the book calls your real name.
The framework the author builds is really intriguing, and it all begins with redefining this central titular word, the scroll.
Okay, let's unpack this, because when I first saw the title of the book, I have to admit, my mind immediately went to an Indiana Jones movie.
Oh, totally.
I pictured a dusty piece of parchment in a museum, or some ancient, intimidating legal document full of strict decrees. But Eliazar is very clear right from chapter 1 that a scroll is not a physical object made of paper and ink.
No, not at all.
He argues it is not a rule book, and it is certainly not a cosmic test that you can fail.
Right. If we connect this to the bigger picture, Seraphim defines your scroll as a heavenly record of your identity, your purpose, and your original design. The operative detail in his framework is that this record was written before you were even born.
Wow. Before you were born.
According to the text, it holds your real name, your purpose, your alignment, and your seat. He presents it as the absolute truth about you, recorded without fear, without shame, and without the confusion of human existence.
Which is a perspective that completely flips the script on how most of us view our lives. From a modern sociological standpoint, we usually think, I am born as a blank slate, and my job is to figure out who I am through trial and error, through my career successes, and through my relational failures.
That blank slate theory is the absolute foundation of modern self-help culture. But what the book is doing is attempting to shift the fundamental paradigm of human existence. Seraphim suggests moving us from a paradigm of becoming to a paradigm of remembrance.
Remembrance.
He explicitly writes, you are not becoming someone new. You are remembering who you've always been.
Remembering versus becoming. That is a massive distinction.
It changes the entire psychological landscape of how you approach your day. Think about the pressure of becoming. If you are trying to become someone, your inherent value is entirely tied to your output, your daily achievements, and how the world perceives you.
Which is exhausting.
It's a very fragile state of being, which is why we see such rampant imposter syndrome today. If your identity is based on what you built yesterday, you have to defend it today.
Yeah, that makes so much sense.
But if your life is a process of remembrance, as the author posits, then your core identity is already secure. It was established before you ever had to perform. To ground this concept, Seraphim references an ancient scripture, Jeremiah 1.5, which states, before I formed you in the womb, I knew you.
Wait, let me pause you there. I can hear the skeptic in my own head asking a question here.
Go for it.
If my purpose and identity were completely written out in a scroll before I was even born, doesn't that effectively remove my free will? It sounds a bit like strict destiny or determinism. How does the author reconcile a pre-written scroll with the choices we make every day?
That is a very valid critique, and it's one the author actually addresses. Seraphim doesn't frame the scroll as a micromanaged script where every footstep and cup of coffee is predetermined.
Okay.
Instead, he describes it as an original design or a blueprint. You have the free will to ignore the blueprint, to build a life completely out of alignment with it, and to chase after identities that don't fit you. The scroll isn't forcing you to act, it's the baseline of who you are when you strip away the acting.
So it's less about a puppet master pulling strings and more about a homing beacon that you can choose to tune into or ignore.
That's a great way to articulate it, and I really want you listening to consider the psychological relief in this framework. Think about the implications. If you were known before time began, as the book suggests, then your foundational identity cannot be undone by earthly mistakes. It cannot be erased by a failed business venture, a painful rejection, or the crushing expectations of your peers. You are not starting from scratch. You are starting from a place of being fully known.
That takes a significant amount of weight right off your shoulders. You don't have to desperately forge an identity out of raw materials because the truest version of you has already been recorded.
Exactly.
And this naturally brings us to a concept that Seraphim introduces in chapter 4, which feels incredibly countercultural right now. The idea of being seated.
What's fascinating here is how the author redefines the modern struggle for relevance. In our current culture, the accepted posture is always running, climbing, reaching, grinding.
A hustle.
We are obsessed with hustle culture. We are constantly trying to secure our place in the world, fighting for a literal or metaphorical seat at the table.
I see that everywhere. We are told to lean in, to disrupt, to outwork everyone else in the room, just to prove we deserve to be there.
Exactly. And being seated in the context of your scroll stands in direct opposition to that. Seraphim clarifies that this does not mean physically sitting in a chair, obviously, and it definitely doesn't mean being placed on a stage or in a spotlight where everyone is clapping for your achievements.
Right.
According to the text, it is a spiritual position of rest, identity, and authority in Christ. The author references Ephesians 2.6, noting the theological concept that individuals are already raised up and seated in heavenly places.
The underlying message being that heaven has already given you a place. You don't have to claw your way to the top to earn it.
The contrast Seraphim makes is incredibly clarifying. He argues that when you are seated, you don't chase identity, you live from it. You don't perform for the approval of the crowd because you are resting in what is already undeniably true.
Wow.
You aren't standing in line anxiously hoping to be chosen by an employer or a partner to validate your worth. You are already seated.
I can appreciate the beauty of that, but my practical brain immediately goes to the potential pitfalls. What if I mess up? What if I get distracted by the hustle, make a terrible career choice, and accidentally ruin my scroll?
It's a deeply human reaction to feel that way. We are so conditioned by the transactional nature of the world to think we can permanently break our own lives with one wrong move. But the author anticipates this anxiety beautifully in Chapter 8, which is entirely dedicated to common misunderstandings and gentle clarifications.
That chapter is a breath of fresh air. He specifically addresses the paralyzing fear of having to be perfect. Eliazar clarifies that walking in your scroll does not require perfection. It only requires alignment.
This is where we need to differentiate the terms. Perfection is a performance metric. It's an impossible standard of flawless execution. Alignment in the author's framework is simply a return to center.
Like a compass.
Or think of it like driving a car down the highway. Perfection is trying to drive 100 miles without ever turning the steering wheel a fraction of an inch. It's rigid, impossible, and incredibly stressful. Alignment is just gently course correcting when you realize you've drifted a little too far into the other lane.
That's a great visual.
The book is saying life is about gentle course corrections, not a perfectly straight, error-free line.
That analogy makes it so much more approachable. Another massive clarification he makes is for people who suffer from what I call ticking clock anxiety. People who panic thinking, I'm 30 years old. If I don't figure out my ultimate purpose in my scroll right now, I'm going to miss my destiny entirely.
We see that anxiety constantly, especially in millennials and Gen Z who feel they are running out of time to be extraordinary. But the author reminds the reader of a core theological premise. Your scroll is eternal. You cannot miss your scroll just because you took a wrong turn in your 20s or had a confusing, unproductive decade. Seraphim writes that you don't find your scroll by rushing and panicking. You remember it by resting. Because it was written outside of the constraints of human time, it is not bound by your earthly delays.
You don't find it by rushing. You remember it by resting. That is definitely a concept worth sitting with. And this brings us to Chapter 5, where the book really deepens the foundation of what the scroll actually is, and more specifically, who it is modeled after.
This represents a crucial pivot in the text. The author states plainly that Christ isn't just a historical character or a moral teacher in your story. He is the story. The book frames Christ as the ultimate pattern, the fundamental design that your specific scroll was shaped after.
It's important to note how Seraphim frames this for the reader. He is not presenting this as a rigid institutional religious system. He's not giving a list of theological rules you have to memorize to pass some cosmic exam. He frames it entirely as a relationship and a return to original design.
If we look closely at the text, the author posits that you are not just trying to become like Christ through sheer exhausting willpower. His framework suggests you came from him. His love shapes your scroll, and his nature aligns your identity. To know your scroll is fundamentally to know him.
Yeah.
This perspective takes the immense pressure off finding your unique purpose as an isolated, lonely quest and turns it into a shared journey with the one who holds the original record of your life.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. Because as you align with this pattern, as you step into this seated posture of rest and course correct along the way, the book says something specific begins to surface. This is from Chapter 9. It's the concept of your real name.
The concept of the real name. This is arguably the most poetic and psychologically resonant part of the book.
I found it deeply moving, because we all have names, obviously. We have the names printed on our birth certificates. But more than that, as we move through life, we walk around completely covered in labels.
Oh, absolutely.
Names given to us by our professions, by our family roles, by our financial successes, and very often by our deepest pains and traumas.
That is so true. We internalize these labels until they become our identity. We are called the high achiever, the quiet one, the failure, the divorced one, or the reliable one who fixes everyone's problems.
And we mistakenly adopt those temporary earthly labels as our eternal identity. We wear them like name tags. But the author suggests that written in your scroll is a true name. A name that reflects heaven's exact perspective of who you are, completely untouched by the trauma you've endured or the expectations the world has dumped on you.
To illustrate this, the book brings in a specific detail from Revelation 2.17. It's the promise of the white stone. The scripture reads, "I will give a white stone with a new name written on it, known only to the one who receives it." According to Seraphim, this name isn't actually new to heaven. It was written before time began. But it is profoundly new to you because you are finally remembering it.
What I appreciate is that you don't have to force this discovery. You don't have to sit down with a journal, light a candle, and try to invent a cool-sounding spiritual name for yourself.
Right. No forced mystique.
Eliazar says this name will simply rise up in you naturally. It might come in quiet moments, in a deep sense of peace when you hear a certain phrase, or in a sudden moment of clarity. And when you finally hear it, the author says, it won't just sound right, it will feel like home.
Feel like home. That phrase perfectly captures the essence of the remembrance paradigm we discussed earlier. It's the sensation of returning to a place you forgot you belonged to.
Okay, so we have unpacked these incredibly beautiful, lofty concepts. We have eternal scrolls, being seated in heavenly places and discovering a real name written on a white stone. But I know what you're thinking listening to this. How do I actually do this on a Tuesday morning?
Exactly.
When my alarm goes off, I've spilled coffee on my shirt, I'm late for work, and I'm stressed about the electric bill. How do we bring this ethereal deep dive down to earth?
That is the exact problem Chapter 7 is designed to solve. It's titled, Walking in Your Scroll Every Day. The author is very practical here. He explicitly states that you do not need a massive platform, a perfect financial situation, or to retreat to a silent monastery to live this out. You can walk in your scroll right in the middle of your loud, messy, ordinary life.
He outlines 5 practical daily steps to live from this place of remembrance. Let's walk through them because they are incredibly grounding. Step number 1 is start from stillness.
This is the foundational practice. Before you move, before you react to the frantic demands of the day or check your phone, just pause. Even if it's just for 60 seconds while sitting on the edge of your bed.
Just a minute is all it takes.
Exactly. The goal is to let your spirit remember, I am already known, I am already seated. You are intentionally shifting your internal gears from the hustle of the world to the rest of your scroll.
Which is so hard to do when you're rushing, but so vital. Step 2 is to speak from truth. This is about recognizing that your words actively shape your psychological atmosphere. If you are operating from your scroll, you choose words that align with peace.
Let's contextualize that. If you walk into an office where everyone is panicking about a looming deadline or a round of layoffs, the natural human instinct is to mimic that panic to fit in.
Oh, for sure. Contagious anxiety.
Right. Speaking from truth means you aren't speaking out of fear and you aren't just echoing the anxiety of the room. Even just taking a breath and saying out loud to yourself, I choose peace today, and my value is not tied to this outcome. That is an act of alignment.
I love that. Step 3 is to notice what resonates. As you move through your day, pay attention to the moments that bring a sudden sense of clarity or unexplainable peace. The author refers to these as breadcrumbs.
Breadcrumbs are fascinating because they often bypass our logical brain. Maybe it's a passing conversation with a stranger, a quiet moment walking to your car, or a sudden, strong inclination to help a colleague. When something feels deeply familiar to your spirit, even if it's a brand new experience, the book suggests that is your scroll speaking to you. It's that feeling like home sensation we talked about.
Following the breadcrumbs of peace sounds lovely, but we have to address reality. What happens when we inevitably mess up? Because we will lose our temper, we will give in to anxiety, we will perform for approval. That brings us to step 4, which I think is the most important one for recovering perfectionists. Return quickly.
This raises an important question about how we fundamentally handle failure. Usually when we lose alignment, say you snap at your partner or you spend 3 hours doom scrolling and comparing yourself to people on the internet, the immediate psychological response is a shame spiral. We beat ourselves up. We think we've ruined our progress and proved we are fakes.
The shame spiral is real. It convinces you that your mistake is your identity.
But the author's approach is radically different. He says, drop the shame completely and immediately. Just return. Remembrance is always available to you. You literally just say within yourself, that wasn't me. I return to what heaven wrote.
That wasn't me. That phrasing is so gracious. It separates your eternal core identity from a temporary earthly mistake. You aren't denying that you made the mistake, but you are refusing to let it rename you.
Precisely.
Finally, we have step 5, live with eternity in mind.
This step is about recognizing the weight and value of your daily, seemingly mundane choices. Because your scroll is eternal, the way you treat people matters beyond just today's interactions. Kindness matters. Integrity in quiet moments matters. Obedience to that small inner prompt matters. You aren't just passing time on earth trying to pay bills according to the text. You are releasing the unique presence you were designed to carry.
As we look at these 5 steps, stillness, speaking truth, noticing what resonates, returning quickly, and living for eternity. It's comforting to realize that none of them require cinematic, life-altering moments.
That's a vital takeaway. The author explicitly warns against the misunderstanding that you need to feel something dramatic or explosive to know you are walking in your scroll. True remembrance often doesn't look like fireworks or a booming voice from the sky. Stillness and a quiet, steady peace are just as powerful, if not more so, than constant emotional highs.
So what did this all mean? Let's bring all of these pieces together for you. The absolute core takeaway from Eliazar Seraphim's Your Scroll is this. Your identity is not a project you have to desperately forge, earn, or defend against the world. It is not a performance you have to maintain. According to this framework, it is an eternal record written in profound love before you took your first breath. And you are being invited to a seated posture, a place of rest and gentle alignment, where you can finally trade the exhaustion of trying to become someone for the absolute peace of remembering who you've always been.
It is a profound paradigm shift that challenges so much of how we operate today. And as we wrap up our exploration of these sources, I want to leave you with one final thought to mull over. We've talked extensively about how your scroll was written in eternity, a place completely outside the bounds, the ticking clocks, and the pressures of human time. And we've seen how discovering it requires deep stillness rather than frantic action.
Right.
So consider this. What if the parts of your life right now that feel like the biggest delays, the most frustrating detours, or the most agonizing waiting periods, what if they aren't actually interruptions at all? What if those quiet, sometimes painfully frustrating pauses are exactly the stillness heaven designed for you to finally clear away the noise so you can hear the whisper of your real name?
That completely changes how you look at the waiting rooms of life, doesn't it? It frames the delay not as a punishment, but as preparation. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive today. Take a deep breath, drop the heavy baggage of performance, and rest today in exactly who you have always been. We'll catch you next time.
We'd like to thank you for joining the Scrollfire Podcast tonight. This is especially good NTM Podcast deep dive, talking about your scroll. Now, your scroll is also a book that you can find on Kindle. On Kindle. That's right. I'm sorry. On Kindle, you can find it on Kindle, and it is part of a series called the Seated Series. Now, the Seated Series are made of 2 pillar books and 7 stone books. The stone books are Saved to Sit, Your Scroll, Before the World Named You, which is a remembrance book, Mantles, Thrones, Jurisdiction, and Governance. And the pillar books are You Came from the Mind of God and the Image of God. Each one of these books is available on Kindle. I suggest that you use Kindle Unlimited because Kindle Unlimited, for a small subscription fee, you could read all of the books for free. And once again, I'd like to thank our host, Sebastian, and Meagan Scott for shedding light on your scroll. Hopefully, and the thing about the Seated Series is that it helps build your spiritual formation. It's not a mystery, it's a reality in how it's formulated. And the fact that you were formulated before, in the mind of God before time. We're going to continue to go deeper into our next episode, which is remembrance. After that, we'll journey into mantles, thrones, jurisdiction, and governance. Until then, I'd like to thank you once again for joining the Scrollfire Podcast. This is Eliazar Seraphim. Oh, and before I go, let me point you in the direction of our podcast. Our podcast are on YouTube at Scrollfire Publishing, and also on Spotify at Scrollfire Podcast. Thank you once again. This is Eliazar Seraphim.